Hello everyone, and welcome back to Code Your English. I'm so happy you're here because today's lesson could completely change the way you think about success, learning, and personal growth. Have you ever wondered why some people achieve extraordinary results while others, with the same dreams and the same motivation, seem to stay exactly where they are? The answer isn't talent, luck, or endless motivation. It lies in the small habits we repeat every single day. Today, we're exploring one of the most influential books of our time, Atomic Habits by James Clear, and together we'll discover how tiny daily actions can create life-changing results. At the same time, you'll improve your English with powerful vocabulary, natural expressions, and real-life speaking patterns that fluent speakers use every day. So, if you're ready to become better at English while becoming better at life, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and join our growing community of learners from around the world. Now, grab your notebook, stay with me until the very end, and let's begin this incredible journey together. Imagine two people standing at the edge of a frozen lake. Both of them decide on the very same day to change their lives. One person wants to get in shape. The other wants to build a successful career. They are equally motivated, equally excited, and equally determined. But here is the strange part. 5 years later, one of them is unrecognizable, stronger, calmer, more confident, living a completely different life. And the other one is standing in almost exactly the same spot, wondering what went wrong. Same starting point, same intentions, completely different outcomes. What actually separates these two people? It is not talent. It is not luck, and it is definitely not willpower, even though most of us have been taught to believe that. The real answer is something so small, so quiet, and so easy to ignore that almost nobody notices it happening until, one day, they wake up and realize their entire life has been shaped by it. That invisible force is called a habit. And today, we are going to explore one of the most transformative books ever written about it. Atomic Habits by James Clear. By the end of this episode, you will not only understand exactly why small daily actions create massive long-term results, but you will also learn practical, science-backed methods to build good habits and break bad ones starting today. And as always here on Code Your English, while we explore this powerful idea, you will also pick up rich vocabulary and natural English expressions, the kind that fluent speakers actually use in real conversations. So get comfortable, maybe grab a notebook, because this episode might genuinely change the direction of your life. Why this book became a global phenomenon. Let's talk for a moment about the man behind this book. James Clear was not always a best-selling author or a habits expert. In fact, his story begins with pain rather than success. When he was in high school during a baseball game, a metal bat swung backward and struck him directly in the face. The injury was severe. He suffered a fractured skull, damage to his eye socket, and seizures that put his life at risk. For a young athlete with big dreams, this accident could have ended everything. But instead of giving up, James Clear made a decision that would eventually shape his entire philosophy on life. He committed to rebuilding himself, one small habit at a time. He started ridiculously small. He focused on keeping his room tidy. He focused on getting enough sleep. He focused on lifting slightly heavier weights than the week before, even if the improvement was tiny. Over months and years, these microscopic improvements compounded into something extraordinary. He became a college athlete, was named to the ESPN Academic All-America team, and eventually turned his personal experiment with habits into one of the most respected frameworks on human behavior ever published. Atomic Habits has now sold over 20 million copies worldwide and has been translated into more than 50 languages. But the reason it became such a phenomenon is not because it offers some secret trick. It became a phenomenon because it explains, with brutal clarity, why most people fail to change and what to do differently. Why this book became a global phenomenon. Let's talk for a moment about the man behind this book. James Clear was not always a best-selling author or a habits expert. In fact, his story begins with pain rather than success. When he was in high school, during a baseball game, a metal bat swung backward and struck him directly in the face. The injury was severe. He suffered a fractured skull, damage to his eye socket, and seizures that put his life at risk. For a young athlete with big dreams, this accident could have ended everything. But instead of giving up, James Clear made a decision that would eventually shape his entire philosophy on life. He committed to rebuilding himself, one small habit at a time. He started ridiculously small. He focused on keeping his room tidy. He focused on getting enough sleep. He focused on lifting slightly heavier weights than the week before, even if the improvement was tiny. Over months and years, these microscopic improvements compounded into something extraordinary. He became a college athlete, was named to the ESPN Academic All-America team, and eventually turned his personal experiment with habits into one of the most respected frameworks on human behavior ever published. Atomic Habits has now sold over 20 million copies worldwide and has been translated into more than 50 languages. But the reason it became such a phenomenon is not because it offers some secret trick. It became a phenomenon because it explains, with brutal clarity, why most people fail to change, and what to do differently. The big idea: tiny changes, remarkable results. Here is the central idea of the entire book, and I want you to really absorb this. Habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. If you have ever had a savings account, you know that compound interest means your money grows faster over time because you earn interest not only on what you originally saved, but also on the interest you already accumulated. Habits work in exactly the same mathematical way. Getting 1% better every day does not sound impressive. It sounds almost meaningless. But if you improve by just 1% every day for one entire year, you do not end up 37% better. You end up 37 times better. That is the astonishing power of small, consistent improvement multiplied across time. Now flip that idea around, because this is where it gets uncomfortable. If you get 1% worse every day, through small bad decisions, procrastination, or neglect, that same compounding effect works against you. Over a year, you don't just decline a little. You nearly disappear down to almost nothing. This is precisely why habits matter so much more than we usually realize. A single decision to skip the gym, eat something unhealthy, or scroll on your phone instead of studying rarely destroys your life in that one moment. The real damage happens when that single decision becomes a repeated pattern, echoing forward into hundreds of future decisions. James Clear describes this using a beautifully simple metaphor. Habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. Just as money multiplies through compounding, so does the effect of habits. The quality of our lives often depends not on some single, dramatic transformation, but on the cumulative effect of thousands of tiny decisions, repeated daily, almost invisibly. Let me bring this to life with a real story from the book, because stories help ideas stick in our memory far better than pure theory does. In the early 2000s, the British professional cycling team was, quite frankly, a national embarrassment. In over 100 years of competitive cycling, no British cyclist had ever won the Tour de France. The team was so unimpressive that one of Europe's top bike manufacturers refused to sell them equipment, worried that other successful teams would be embarrassed to be seen using the same bikes as the British. Then, in 2003, a man named Dave Brailsford was appointed as the new performance director. And Brailsford believed in a strategy he called the aggregation of marginal gains. His philosophy was simple, yet radical. If you break down absolutely everything that goes into riding a bicycle, and then you improve each individual element by just 1%, all of those tiny improvements will add up to something remarkable. So his team began improving things nobody had ever thought to improve before. They redesigned the bicycle seats to be more comfortable. They rubbed alcohol on the tires for slightly better grip. They asked riders to wear electrically heated shorts to keep their muscles at an ideal temperature. They tested different fabrics in wind tunnels. They even hired a surgeon to teach each rider the correct way to wash their hands, reducing the chances of catching a cold during competition season. Individually, none of these changes seemed significant. Together, they transformed everything. Within 5 years, the British cycling team dominated the sport, winning 60% of the gold medals available at the 2008 Beijing Olympics. In 2012, they broke 9 Olympic records and 7 world records. That same year, Bradley Wiggins became the first British cyclist in history to win the Tour de France. The following year, his teammate Chris Froome won it again. Over the next several years, British cyclists won the Tour de France an astonishing 5 times in 6 years. This transformation is now considered one of the greatest turnarounds in the history of sports. And it happened not through one heroic breakthrough, but through hundreds of nearly invisible 1% improvements, compounding relentlessly over time. Take a moment right now and think honestly about your own English learning journey. Have you ever expected fluency to arrive suddenly, like a lightning bolt, after one intense study session? Real fluency, just like real transformation in any area of life, arrives quietly through consistent 1% improvements. One new word today, one grammar pattern practiced tomorrow, one conversation attempted the day after that. Why willpower alone always fails you. Now, here is a question worth sitting with for a moment. If small habits are so powerful, why do so many people still fail to build them? Why do New Year's resolutions collapse by the middle of January? Why does a person who genuinely wants to exercise more often find themselves back on the sofa within 2 weeks? The traditional answer most people give is simple. They blame themselves. They say things like, I just don't have enough discipline, or I lack willpower. But James Clear argues, with strong psychological evidence, that this explanation is fundamentally wrong. Willpower is not some unlimited fuel tank you can draw from whenever you choose. It is a limited resource, and research in psychology consistently shows that our ability to resist temptation weakens throughout the day as we make more and more decisions. This phenomenon is sometimes called decision fatigue. This means that relying purely on motivation and willpower is, quite honestly, one of the worst long-term strategies for behavior change. Motivation is unreliable. It rises and falls depending on your mood, your energy levels, and outside circumstances completely beyond your control. If your entire habit strategy depends on feeling motivated, you have built your success on unstable ground. So what actually works instead? According to the book, the real secret is designing your environment and your systems so that good behavior becomes almost automatic, requiring far less willpower in the first place. Successful people are not necessarily more disciplined than everyone else. They have simply structured their lives so that the right choice becomes the easy choice. Forget goals. Focus on systems. This brings us to one of the most powerful and, honestly, one of the most counterintuitive ideas in the entire book. You should fall in love with systems, not goals. Most of us have been trained since childhood to set goals. Get good grades, get promoted, lose 10 kilograms, learn English fluently within 1 year. Goals feel productive, and society constantly encourages us to set them. But James Clear points out a serious flaw in goal-obsessed thinking. Winners and losers often have the exact same goals. Every Olympic athlete wants to win a gold medal. Every company wants to become the market leader. Every student learning English wants to become fluent. If everyone shares the same goal, then the goal itself cannot be what separates success from failure. What actually separates them is the system, the daily process, the habitual actions that people follow, whether or not they feel motivated on any particular day. As Clear puts it, you do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. Let's make this practical. Imagine two students both dream of becoming fluent English speakers within 1 year. This is their goal. Student number 1 writes this goal on a piece of paper, feels excited for a week, studies intensely for a few days, and then, when life gets busy, quietly abandons the whole plan. Student number 2 instead builds a system. 15 minutes of listening practice every morning with coffee. 5 new vocabulary words reviewed every evening before bed. 1 short conversation practiced every single day, regardless of mood or energy level. A year later, which student do you think achieved fluency? Goals are useful for setting a direction, but systems are what actually get you there. This is precisely why, here on Code Your English, we constantly emphasize small, repeatable daily practice rather than occasional intense study marathons. Consistency built into a system will always outperform occasional bursts of motivation. Identity, the deepest layer of habit change. Now we arrive at what I personally consider the most profound section of the entire book. The idea that genuinely has the power to change how you see yourself forever. James Clear explains that there are 3 layers at which behavior change can occur, and picturing them as rings will help. The outer ring represents changing your outcomes. This includes things like losing weight, publishing a book, or winning a competition. Most people's goals exist at this outer level. The middle ring represents changing your process. This includes your habits and systems, such as adopting a new gym routine or a new daily study method. This is where most habit-building advice usually stops. But the innermost ring, the one Clear insists is truly the most powerful, is changing your identity. This layer involves your beliefs, your worldview, your self-image, and your judgments about yourself and others around you. Most people begin the process of change by focusing on what they want to achieve. This leads to outcome-based habits. Clear argues we should flip this entirely and focus first on who we wish to become. This leads to identity-based habits. Here is why this distinction matters so profoundly. Every action you take is essentially a vote for the type of person you believe yourself to be. When you complete one workout, you are not just burning calories. You are casting a vote for the identity of someone who takes care of their body. When you write one paragraph, you are casting a vote for the identity of a writer. When you practice English for 10 minutes, even on a day when you feel exhausted, you are casting a vote for the identity of someone who is genuinely becoming fluent. No single vote will transform your identity overnight, exactly the same way that €1 deposited into a bank account will not make you rich. But as votes accumulate, so does the evidence of your new identity, until one day, believing in this new version of yourself no longer requires effort. It simply becomes true. This is precisely why so many diets fail. A person who says, "I am trying to lose weight," is speaking from an outcome-based mindset, and when temptation strikes, this identity offers no protective power at all. But a person who says, "I am not the kind of person who eats this type of food," is speaking from a completely different place, a settled internal identity, rather than a fragile external outcome they are chasing. The tricky part, and I want to be honest with you here, is that identity change works in both directions. Every single time you tell yourself, even jokingly, "I'm just bad at languages," or "I'm not disciplined," you are casting a vote for that identity, reinforcing it, and making it slightly more true. Be extremely careful with the story you repeat about yourself, because your brain is always listening, and it is always keeping score. Now pause the video for a moment and genuinely ask yourself this question. What is the type of person I want to become? Not what do I want to achieve, but who do I want to be? Once you can clearly answer that question, your daily habits stop feeling like a chore, a burden you are forcing yourself through. They transform into proof, small pieces of evidence, that you are already becoming that very person. The habit loop. Understanding how habits actually work. Before we can effectively change any habit, we need to understand what a habit actually is on a neurological level. According to extensive behavioral research referenced throughout the book, every single habit follows the same fundamental four-step pattern, often called the habit loop. The first stage is the cue. This is the small trigger that tells your brain to initiate a particular behavior. It could be the time of day, a specific location, an emotional state, the presence of certain people, or even an action that immediately precedes it. The second stage is the craving. This is the motivational force behind every habit, the desire for a change in internal state. You don't actually crave brushing your teeth. You crave the feeling of a clean mouth. You don't crave scrolling through your phone. You crave the small hit of novelty and social connection it delivers. The third stage is the response. This is the actual habit you perform, the thought or action you take, and whether it occurs depends on how motivated you are and how much friction, meaning difficulty or effort, stands between you and performing that behavior. The fourth and final stage is the reward. This is the ultimate purpose behind every single habit. Rewards satisfy the craving that triggered the behavior in the first place, and crucially, they also teach your brain which actions are worth remembering and repeating in the future. Together, these four stages form a continuous neurological feedback loop. Cue, craving, response, reward, cue, craving, response, reward, endlessly repeating until certain behaviors become so automatic that they require almost no conscious thought whatsoever. This is precisely why habits can feel nearly impossible to break through willpower alone. You are not simply fighting a bad decision. You are fighting a deeply reinforced neurological pathway. The 4 laws of behavior change. Once James Clear identified this 4-stage loop, he transformed it into what is genuinely the most practical and actionable part of the entire book. 4 simple laws you can apply to build almost any good habit, and, when reversed, break almost any bad habit. Let's walk through each law carefully, because this is where the real transformation begins. Law 1. Make it obvious. The first law targets the cue stage of the habit loop. Since so many of our habits are triggered automatically, without conscious awareness, the first step toward meaningful change is simply becoming aware of what you are currently doing. James Clear recommends something called a habit scorecard, where, for one entire day, you observe your existing habits without attempting to judge or change them, simply labeling each one as either positive, negative, or neutral. This single exercise creates awareness, and awareness always comes before genuine transformation. Once you become aware of your habits, the next step is designing clear, specific cues that make good behavior obvious and impossible to ignore. Clear introduces a wonderfully simple formula for this. I will specific behavior at specific time, in specific location. Research consistently shows that people who make specific plans like this are dramatically more likely to actually follow through, compared to people who simply say, I want to exercise more, without any concrete plan. There is also a brilliant technique called habit stacking. Instead of trying to attach a brand new habit to a random, unpredictable moment in your day, you attach it directly to a habit you are already performing consistently. The formula looks like this. After current habit, I will new habit. For example, after I pour my morning coffee, I will review 5 new English words. After I brush my teeth, I will write down 3 things I'm grateful for. This technique works because it borrows the existing neurological momentum of a habit that is already automatic, making the new behavior far easier to trigger consistently. And finally, this law reminds us of something incredibly powerful. Your environment shapes your behavior far more than your motivation ever will. If you want to eat healthier food, don't rely purely on willpower while unhealthy snacks sit visible on your kitchen counter. Simply remove them from sight and replace them with fruit instead. If you want to read more books, place one on your pillow every morning so it's the very first thing you see at night. Make the cues for good habits impossible to miss, and make the cues for bad habits invisible. Law 2. Make it attractive. The second law targets the craven stage. Human beings are far more likely to repeat behaviors that feel genuinely appealing, exciting, or emotionally rewarding to us. This explains why so many people struggle to build supposedly boring habits, like exercising, studying, or saving money, while effortlessly repeating habits like checking social media, which feel instantly attractive and satisfying. One powerful strategy the book recommends here is called temptation bundling. This involves pairing an action you need to do with an action you genuinely want to do. For example, you might allow yourself to watch your favorite show, but only while exercising on a stationary bike. You might allow yourself to listen to an exciting podcast, but only during your daily English practice session. Over time, your brain begins associating the previously unappealing habit with genuine excitement and anticipation. Another remarkably important factor here is your social environment. We are, whether we consciously realize it or not, deeply influenced by the habits of the people surrounding us. We tend to imitate the habits of three particular groups: the close people around us, the large majority around us, and the powerful people we admire and look up to. This is precisely why joining a community, culture, or group where your desired behavior is already the normal, expected behavior can dramatically accelerate your success. If you surround yourself with people who read consistently, reading starts to feel normal. If you surround yourself with fluent English speakers who value daily practice, that same daily discipline starts to feel completely natural to you as well, rather than forced or exhausting. Law 3. Make it easy. The third law targets the response stage directly, and honestly, I believe this might be the single most underrated law in the entire book. Human beings are, at a very fundamental level, wired to conserve energy and choose the path of least resistance. This is not laziness. It is basic human nature, shaped by thousands of years of evolutionary survival instincts. Therefore, the less effort a habit requires, the more likely we are to actually follow through with it consistently. This is where the crucial concept of friction enters the picture. James Clear explains that we should systematically reduce friction for behaviors we want to encourage, while simultaneously increasing friction for behaviors we want to eliminate. If you want to exercise first thing in the morning, prepare your workout clothes the night before, so they're already sitting there waiting for you, removing any decision-making from your groggy, half-asleep morning brain. If you want to reduce mindless scrolling on your phone, delete the app entirely, or leave your device charging in a completely different room overnight. Perhaps the most famous and immediately practical strategy from this entire section is something called the 2-minute rule. The essential idea is beautifully simple. When you start any new habit, it should genuinely take less than 2 minutes to complete. Read before bed each night becomes simply read one single page. Do 30 minutes of yoga becomes simply take out my yoga mat. Study English for 1 hour becomes simply open my notebook and write one single sentence. The purpose of this rule is not to trick yourself, and it's not about achieving some enormous result immediately. Its true purpose is mastering the habit of consistently showing up. Once showing up becomes automatic and effortless, gradually scaling up the difficulty and duration becomes remarkably easy because you have already built the foundational neurological pathway. As Clear memorably explains it, you have to standardize before you can optimize. You cannot improve a habit that doesn't exist yet in the first place. Law 4. Make it satisfying. The fourth and final law targets the reward stage, and it addresses possibly the greatest challenge in building any lasting habit. Our brains are strongly wired to prioritize immediate rewards over delayed ones, a psychological pattern researchers call our inherent immediacy bias. This single bias explains an enormous amount of self-destructive human behavior. Smoking delivers an immediate pleasurable sensation, while the devastating health consequences arrive slowly, years or even decades later. Scrolling social media delivers an immediate dopamine hit, while the resulting damage to your focus and productivity accumulates gradually and invisibly. Meanwhile, exercising delivers genuine long-term benefits, but the immediate sensation is often discomfort, sweat, and fatigue, with little to no instant reward. To successfully overcome this natural bias, we need to intentionally add a small element of immediate satisfaction to habits that only pay off in the distant future. One remarkably effective method the book describes is habit tracking. Something as simple as marking an X on a calendar every single day you complete your habit creates an immediate visual reward and generates a genuinely satisfying feeling of accomplishment and progress. Over time, you will find yourself increasingly motivated not to break that visible chain of consecutive successes. However, Clear offers one absolutely essential piece of guidance connected to habit tracking, something he calls the rule of never missing twice. Perfection is not actually the ultimate goal here, and pursuing it will likely set you up for eventual failure and discouragement. Missing a single day of any habit, whether due to illness, unexpected travel, or simple human exhaustion, has almost no measurable long-term impact on your overall progress. But missing twice in a row is genuinely dangerous, because that's precisely the moment when a temporary lapse quietly transforms into an entirely new, unwanted habit. If you skip the gym on Monday, that is simply life happening. But make absolutely certain you return to the gym on Wednesday, no matter how unmotivated you feel in that particular moment. Common mistakes people make when applying these ideas. Now, let's take an honest look at where people typically go wrong when they first attempt to apply these principles, because understanding these common mistakes may save you months or even years of frustration. The first major mistake is trying to change too many habits simultaneously. Motivated by initial excitement, people often attempt to overhaul their entire diet, exercise routine, sleep schedule, and study habits all within the very same week. This overwhelming approach depletes willpower rapidly and typically results in complete abandonment within just a few days. The far more effective approach is starting with just one single keystone habit, mastering it thoroughly, and only then gradually adding additional habits, one at a time. The second mistake is focusing excessively on the outcome rather than trusting the underlying system. People frequently become discouraged when visible results don't appear immediately, not realizing that most meaningful progress remains invisible for a considerable period of time. James Clear describes this phenomenon as the plateau of latent potential. Imagine an ice cube sitting in a room as the temperature very slowly rises, degree by degree. Nothing visible seems to happen at 25 degrees, 26 degrees, 27 degrees. Then, at exactly 32 degrees Fahrenheit, the ice suddenly and dramatically begins to melt. The final degree didn't cause that melting on its own. It was simply the release of all the invisible work that had already been quietly building beneath the surface. This is precisely why so many people abandon their new habits right before their genuine breakthrough moment. They mistakenly interpret an apparent lack of visible results as proof that their efforts simply aren't working. The third mistake is neglecting to design your environment intentionally. People frequently place enormous trust in their own discipline and willpower while completely ignoring the powerful surrounding cues that are constantly influencing their unconscious behavior. As we discussed earlier, altering your environment is consistently far more effective and sustainable than attempting to alter your willpower alone. The fourth mistake is being far too harsh and self-critical after a single small failure. As we covered previously, missing one day is completely normal, an unavoidable part of being human. But excessive negative self-talk after that single missed day often triggers exactly the kind of identity-based thinking that genuinely sabotages long-term progress. Telling yourself, "I always fail at everything," after skipping just one single workout is not accurate self-reflection. It is quietly reinforcing an identity you almost certainly do not actually want to become true. Bringing these principles to life. Aleph and Thomas. Let's make all of this wonderfully concrete through the eyes of two familiar friends from our community, Aleph and Thomas, both dedicated students working hard to improve their English. Aleph had been trying to become fluent in English for nearly 3 years. Every January, she would write an ambitious goal. This year, I will finally become fluent. She would study intensely for about 2 weeks, then quietly abandon the entire effort once daily life became busy and overwhelming again. She genuinely believed the core problem was her own lack of discipline. But after learning about systems versus goals, Aleph completely reorganized her approach. Instead of the vague goal, "become fluent," she built a specific, sustainable system. 5 minutes of listening practice immediately after her morning coffee, using habit stacking exactly as we described earlier. She used the 2-minute rule, committing only to opening her notebook and writing one single sentence in English each evening. Nothing more demanding than that. She began tracking her practice with a simple visible check mark on her calendar each day. Within just 2 months, that tiny 2-minute commitment had naturally expanded into 20 full minutes of daily focused practice, because showing up itself had become completely automatic. Thomas, meanwhile, faced an entirely different challenge. He already understood grammar rules extremely well, but felt genuinely terrified of speaking English out loud, worried about making embarrassing mistakes in front of native speakers. His craving for improvement was strong, but his environment made active practice feel intimidating and unattractive. So, Thomas applied temptation bundling, deliberately connecting speaking practice with something he already deeply enjoyed: cooking. Every single time he cooked dinner, he began narrating each step out loud in English, describing exactly what he was doing in real time. This transformed a stressful, high-pressure task into something relaxed, private, and genuinely enjoyable. He also intentionally joined an online community of fellow English learners, surrounding himself with people for whom speaking English daily was simply the accepted social norm, exactly as the book describes with our natural tendency toward social imitation. Within just a few months, speaking English no longer felt frightening. It had quietly become part of his identity. He now saw himself as someone who communicates confidently in English, rather than someone who is merely afraid of making mistakes. Neither Elif nor Thomas experienced a single dramatic overnight transformation. Their progress unfolded exactly the way the British cycling teams did, through small, consistent, nearly invisible improvements that steadily compounded over time into something genuinely remarkable. Actionable takeaways you can apply starting today. Let's consolidate everything we've explored into clear, practical action steps you can genuinely start applying today. Not next month, not next Monday, but today. First, clearly identify the type of person you sincerely want to become, and then ask yourself honestly, what would that specific person genuinely do in this exact situation? Let this identity guide your daily decisions rather than chasing distant, abstract outcomes. Second, choose just one single habit, ideally connected to something meaningful in your life, whether that's your English fluency, your physical health, or your career growth. Apply the habit stacking formula. After an existing habit, I will your new desired habit. Third, shrink that new habit down until it genuinely takes less than 2 minutes to complete. Master the simple discipline of consistently showing up before you ever attempt to master the difficulty of the task itself. Fourth, intentionally redesign your immediate physical environment to make good behavior the obvious, easy default choice, while simultaneously making unwanted behavior significantly more difficult and inconvenient to access. Fifth, begin tracking your habit visually, whether through a simple calendar, a mobile app, or a physical notebook. And when, not if, but when you eventually miss a day, extend yourself genuine compassion. Then simply focus with complete determination on never missing twice in a row. The most important lessons, one more time. Before we conclude, let's briefly recap the most essential ideas from everything we've explored together today. Habits function as the compound interest of self-improvement. Tiny, consistent actions accumulate into truly massive results over sufficient time. Lasting change happens at the deep level of identity, not merely through chasing external outcomes. Every single action you take is essentially a small vote for the type of person you are steadily becoming. Systems reliably outperform goals because systems are what you consistently practice, regardless of your fluctuating daily motivation. And finally, all habits, without exception, are shaped by 4 fundamental laws. Make the cue obvious, make the craving attractive, make the response easy, and make the reward genuinely satisfying. A powerful conclusion. Here is a truth I want you to carry with you long after this video ends. You do not need to completely transform your entire life overnight, and honestly, you never truly could, even if you tried with everything you had. Nobody becomes fluent in a single day. Nobody becomes physically strong in a single week. Nobody builds a successful, meaningful career in a single month. But you absolutely can become 1% better today. And then, remarkably, 1% better again tomorrow. And these small, seemingly insignificant improvements will patiently, quietly compound, exactly like that slowly melting ice cube, until one day, seemingly out of nowhere, you look back at the person you used to be and barely even recognize them. The person struggling to form a single English sentence today can, with enough patient repetition, become the confident, fluent speaker of tomorrow. Not because of one single dramatic, life-changing moment, but because of thousands of tiny, consistent choices, quietly compounding day after day after day. Your habits are not simply things you do. They are quiet, ongoing evidence of exactly who you are steadily becoming. So here is your genuine challenge for this week. Choose just one single habit connected to your English learning journey. Shrink it down using the 2-minute rule until it feels almost embarrassingly easy. Stack it directly onto something you already do automatically every day. And then simply show up, one single day at a time. I would genuinely love to hear from you. What is the one small English habit you are personally committing to this week? Write it down in the comments below, because publicly committing to something dramatically increases your chances of actually following through with it. And if this episode helped clarify something meaningful for you today, please consider giving it a like, subscribing to Code Your English if you haven't already, and sharing it with a friend who might genuinely need to hear this message today. In our very next episode, we're going to explore another powerful book that will challenge exactly how you think about motivation itself. So make sure you don't miss it. Remember, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be 1% better than yesterday. See you in the next episode.